Hello and welcome to your November mid-month development update. Now, I spoke earlier to Nigel and Kevin, our regulars on the show, but also joining us was John Woods, Cardano Director of Architecture. Now, last week, of course, the big news was the release of the beta version of the PAB integrated to the wallet backend, so we'll hear more on that soon. But I kick things off by asking Nigel to remind us all exactly what the PAB is and what does it bring to the development experience.
The Plutus application backend, Tim, is our Plutus library, and it's where we've created different amalgamated functionality to make it easier for smart contract developers to interact with their dApps. So it gives them a library of all the kind of classic things that they actually need to do end-to-end functionality on their dApps. Now, the critical thing we've been working on is making sure that we can complete our Plutus transactions by integrating into the wallet. So once we've integrated into our Cardano wallet, or AKA the wallet backend, we're able to complete the Plutus transaction and add in signing information, fees information, and other pieces that we actually derive from the wallet itself. And now we're in this position where we've got a full round trip as a test bed on our testnet, so that we can get ourselves and other partners deploying onto the testnet and simulating their full round trip and functionality in UX for their dApps.
So let's talk a bit more about that. You've obviously been working with a number of partners. We've called them the Plutus Development partners over the last 6 months or so on some of these use cases. And I think that's also been extremely helpful during this phase. Perhaps tell us a bit more about the status there.
We're continuing to work with our 7 close partners. We've actually been working with them now for about six months. And they're all doing a variety of different interesting things, from a betting oracle to an NFT marketplace to DEXs. And there's some really, really good things that are going to be coming out shortly. I can mention a few of those partners. One partner that is useful to mention is we're working closely with MLabs on their NFT marketplace. And they're working really close with us because we're actually using them as our first end-to-end test case. So with that NFT marketplace, it's now deployed onto our testnet, and we are actually creating transactions through it and testing our integration with the PAB and the wallet backend. And over time, over the coming days and weeks, what we'll be doing with MLabs is actually creating a UI on that dApp, and then also integrating into some of the light wallets that are actually in existence out there, whether that's Nami, Jira, or others.
And of course, these partners are not the only people you've been talking to and working with. I believe we've got about 75 projects currently on our Discord, and you've also been running a program working with those guys too.
Yeah, we've reached out to those guys as well, and I think all parties are beginning to really benefit from it. And it's astounding the sheer number of companies that are now starting to develop dApps for the Cardano network. It's going to building it up to something very exciting. What are we doing with those guys? Well, Sunday Swap are one of the ones that are actually, very close now. They're on our testnet, and we're doing a lot of work in terms of performance testing and load testing to understand the characteristics of how and when they deploy their dApp, what actually we're going to see and how best to support them in their delivery. There are a number of others that we're working with, and we'll be doing exactly the same with them. Giving them an insight into our teams and actually getting some really useful and helpful information from them to see what their impact's going to be on our network and what is the best way for us to manage it going forwards.
So let's talk about that network now. John, it's still early days for the ecosystem. It's still early days for dApps on Cardano. And in terms of research and development, obviously the network has had an awful lot of work and time spent on it, but it's still fairly early for a working smart contracts network. Can you maybe just give us a little bit of an insight into what the work is you're doing now and what you're going to be doing over the next few months?
Yes, absolutely. So Cardano is really is really built from 3 core components: the consensus, the ledger, and the network components. And these components have been engineered from the ground up to be as performant as possible. The network layer takes care of all of the interactions between nodes on the network. The consensus layer, of course, is technology that allows us to select the correct chain and make sure that we're Byzantine fault tolerant. And then the ledger layer is where we have all the rules around what a valid transaction is. So we've put enormous effort into making sure that these 3 core components are as lean and highly efficient as possible. So we're starting with a great setup, right? We're starting with the best possible start in order to kind of build the network out for the future. So let's talk a little bit then about some of the exciting things that are coming down the line. So, before I do, let me just do a quick dive into the current iteration of Ouroboros. So you'll remember Ouroboros is the consensus algorithm. It's the world's first provably secure proof of stake algorithm, and it's responsible for making sure that we stay fault tolerant. It's effectively the equivalent in Cardano of Bitcoin's proof of work or mining algorithms. And so Ouroboros is core to Cardano security. The current iteration of Ouroboros is called Ouroboros Preos, and Ouroboros Preos has a security requirement by which we need to make sure that when a block is produced, it traverses the network within 5 seconds. So you can effectively think of this 5-second window that we have to propagate a block throughout the network as a budget that we can spend on increasing certain parameters of the Cardano network. So I can tell you how we're looking at maybe spending a little bit of this budget. So some things that are on the immediate horizon. One, block size increases. So just to remind the viewers, our mempool is 128 kilobytes currently, and our blocks, each block that's created and minted on the network, is 64 kilobytes. And of course, the block size directly affects how many transactions are possible to fit into a single block. I guess quite obviously. We're going to be starting to move up the block size quite soon, and potentially even be able to make changes to increase the overall transaction size that are allowed inside a block. And when we do these changes with the current generation of Ouroboros, we have to make sure that as we increase it, we don't blow through our budget of this 5-second window for block propagation, because we want to make sure that the network stays secure. So we have, a number of levers we can pull, a number of things we can do in order to make the network even more performant today. And we're starting to focus on those things like block size, things like transaction size, and we will be doing that over the coming weeks and months. Maybe I could also add to that, though, in a medium and longer term things that we're looking at. In the medium term, we'll be rolling out Ouroboros Genesis, which is an enhancement to the Ouroboros protocol, and that'll make us it'll lay the groundwork to make us even more decentralized from a networking point of view. And indeed, in the longer term pipeline, we have some very exciting technology, which I won't be able to get into in detail today, but it will allow us to achieve performance an order of magnitude greater than even we have today. So plenty there in scope in terms of evolution for Cardano.
So is that Hydra we're talking about, John, or are you hinting at other things as well?
Hinting at other things, yes. Layer 2 is exciting. Layer 2 is certainly coming. Hydra, you speak of sidechains, but there are other things as well. Which we'll see Layer 1 performance increase massively.
So we published a blog post earlier this week, and of course, John, thank you for your contribution to that. One of the questions we've got back actually is around peer-to-peer. Perhaps you could just talk a little bit around how peer-to-peer fits into the growth and the evolution of the network.
Absolutely. Peer-to-peer is really important. How do things work now? So I think peer-to-peer is really easy to understand if you understand how the Cardano network works right now. So right now, we have, different types of users. We have our SPOs, and they're the stake pool operators. They're responsible for producing blocks and forwarding those blocks across the network. We have our end users, so that could be a person who's using Daedalus to send a transaction. And we also have IO relays. So currently in the network, there are these IOG hosted and run relays, which facilitate network routing between SPOs and facilitate network routing for end users to be able to find a path to the SPOs. They also have another critical function, which is that they help any new entity on the network that's just come on, a new node that's starting up. Those trusted IO relays ensure that that person or that entity who comes online, that node is brought up to speed with the latest blockchain, and they can be done so in a trusted manner. Now, obviously, the big sell of crypto, and the big sell of decentralized networks and decentralized computing is trustlessness. So we want to move as closely as possible to a completely decentralized and a completely trustless network. Well, peer-to-peer, as we're calling it, or P2P, is the technology that's going to take us to a trustless, decentralized network layer for Cardano. So, it's focused on the network layer, not on the consensus or the ledger piece. It's just on the network layer. It's about how do new nodes come online? How do they discover other nodes on the Cardano network? How do we ensure that we're able to leech the blockchain from them and ensure that it's trusted so we know we're getting a good copy of the chain? And peer-to-peer delivers all of that. And even more exciting, we're going to be rolling out Ouroboros, Genesis, and peer-to-peer together. And we actually have it, I believe, in testnet in the coming weeks. in its first incarnation. And that first drop of peer-to-peer with Genesis will allow our SPOs to no longer rely on the I/O relays. And that's really great, right? That's the first step in complete decentralization. So we can start turning off the I/O relays, these trusted kind of bastions of the network, and we can just let the network be an organic and self-regulating thing. Then the last piece, which is going to be the cherry on top of all of this, is that we're building out a thing we call a gossip protocol. And what this will allow us to do is, even for the standard end user, for the person who's sitting at home on their home computer, behind standard home internet with a normal firewall, and is not an SPO who's at the core of the network and has exotic configuration. Gossip plus this peer-to-peer technology will allow even those users to be able to be completely decentralized and not rely on anyone for I guess the routing in the Cardano network. So just to recap, stage one is roll out peer-to-peer with this Ouroboros Genesis. That will emancipate our SPOs from the need to use I/O relays. And then the second phase is where we roll out Gossip on top of that stack of peer-to-peer, and then that will allow our end users to also enjoy the same trustless network. And when we do that, we will actually be in a situation where the network is, from a network and routing point of view, completely decentralized and trustless. So quite exciting.
And as you say, coming to an SPO testnet fairly soon. Kevin, let's maybe come over to you now, and let's go a few clicks further up the stack again. Plutus and Plutus optimizations. That's another area that you're going to be focused on over the next few months. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we're very excited by what we're seeing, Tim, with all the DApp developments that's been going on since we've rolled out Alonso. As we said in one of the earlier sessions, the strategy is to tune the network, to tune the system, to cope with the actual demands of the DApps that we're seeing deployed onto the network. And we've been talking to a number of developers. Nigel's hinted at some of them. There are others that we've been chatting to see what are the most important parameters that we can tune on the network in the short term. One of the things that's coming out to us a focus on the memory limit setting. We've been doing a lot of benchmarking. We've been spending a lot of time looking at how we can increase that so that we can maximize the throughput, increase the concurrency for the transactions that people are producing, for the Plutus scripts that people are writing. So expect to see some movement on that. John's hinted at this. Block sizes, transaction sizes, these are going to play into the number of Plutus scripts that we can process on the blockchain. We're going to be rolling out improvements slowly, carefully and systematically over the coming period, in line with the load that we see developing on the mainnet. So expect to see a lot of things happening with the parameter tuning. Beyond that, we've got a lot of tricks up our sleeve, Tim. So I don't. You've been in some of the conversations about these. There've been lots of engineering conversations going on about how we can make things better for Plutus users going forwards. One obvious thing to do is to compress the scripts. We started off with relatively large Plutus scripts. They're taking up quite a bit of a standard transaction size. One way we can get more throughput out of the system is to compress the scripts on chain. The Plutus scripts will then take less space in memory, will take less space on the chain. That means we can get more Plutus scripts into a transaction. It's a magic way of increasing the throughput without increasing the capacity of the network. So this is going to be extremely beneficial. And then beyond that, we've got a number of performance improvements. We're prioritizing some PRs at the moment that are just going through the node pipeline that are going to smooth out some of the performance. And that's going to let us approach the 5-second boundary that John was talking about earlier. So that's going to give us more capacity, more ability to, again, put more scripts into the system to increase the block size, for example. So we're looking forward to doing that. The Plutus interpreter itself is another area we can look at. If the Plutus interpreter becomes more efficient, then we will be able to execute more Plutus scripts more actual payload in the same amount of time that's available for the script execution. So we can rack that up on the chain. And these are just relatively short-term things. Looking ahead, another way we can reduce the pressure on the memory usage on chain is to introduce some sharing between scripts to have libraries that scripts can use. That's not going to happen overnight. That needs a bit of research, needs a bit of investigation. But that's going to make a big difference long term to what people can actually do. So lots of stuff in the pipeline. Very, very clever and inventive team, very dedicated team working on all of this in the background. So expect to see a lot of things coming out, rolled out incrementally. And most of these aren't going to need hard forks. So you'll be seeing not just a few big steps, Tim, as we've seen so far. You'll be seeing a lot of small steps, so things get a bit better, and then another thing gets rolled out, and so on and so forth. And we think that's very important to emphasize to people. You won't be waiting for the upcoming hard forks. Things will be happening all the time. Things will be getting better all the time. We will be making improvements all the time.
Now, one of the hot topics, John, of course, out there has been around how we manage peak capacity. Most notably, we've seen the mega NFT drops on Friday evenings. Perhaps just tell us a little bit more about how we intend to manage that going forwards.
Sure. So the NFT drops, for sure, they saturate the network. And when I say saturate, what I mean is we have full blocks. And full blocks is really a good thing once no one's waiting too long for their transaction to go through, right? We want the network to be under reasonably high utilization. Here's something that's worth noting, that in general, on average, across a period of time, the utilization of blocks on the Cardano network is somewhere around 24 to 25% currently. So currently we have 75% of the block on average, which is free. Notwithstanding that, of course, you are right. When the NFT drops, some exciting drops have happened, and we've seen utilization for a number of hours where we're sitting at 100%. What's interesting, though, is that the network has quite a smart way to prioritize and deal with transactions. The way mempool works is that it processes what's inside it, and it only pulls, rather than, in some cryptocurrencies, transactions are pushed into a mempool. In Cardano, the node itself will pull into its own mempool when it has space to do so. So there's some subtle differences between how Cardano handles transaction processing and how it typically is done in other cryptocurrencies. And what this means is that even during those periods of 100% utilization for a number of hours, we would typically see that a user wouldn't be waiting for longer than about 15 minutes to get their transaction processed. We obviously want to improve it and get it to be as great as possible. So what are the kind of things that we can do? Well, I think one of the things that addresses the NFT drop style congestion, which is where we just see straight up 100% utilization. The best way to kind of deal with that is larger blocks. If we have larger blocks, then we're processing more transactions per second. But also, you got harking back to what I mentioned earlier on, there are a number of technologies that will allow us to have a higher throughput in a block that's not directly related to the size of the block. So there's a number of things that we're doing in order to be able to process a higher number of transactions per second. So that's our long-term goal, higher transactions per second for the network as a whole, in order to avoid any kind of periods of complete saturation. And in the shorter term, it would be to increase the block size. And I know that there are some other suggestions from the community, things around, like, for example, traffic prioritization and that kind of stuff. So we're looking at these things, and I think maybe Kevin will speak to that later on as well. But yeah, that's where we're at now.
So, Kevin, one of the debates we've seen in the community recently, of course, is around an Ethereum fee market-based model. Any thoughts on that?
Well, we've been following the community conversations around this very carefully, Tim. And as John says, we're very open to suggestions from the community, and so keep them coming, and to having conversations with the community around how Cardano should develop in the long term. But one of the big advantages for Cardano is that it has a predictable fee structure, and we think that consumers and users also appreciate that. So our researchers have been looking for quite a long time at the different fee models we can use. They've already been doing this in the form of the incentive structure that we've got, and we're not seeing at the moment the need for anything like a gas market. But we are looking at ways that to ration the available network capacity in a fair and sensible way. So as John says, one of the ways you can do this is by sensible traffic prioritization, by choosing which transactions should appear first onto the chain. Maybe there are some transactions that are there to ensure the network continues to operate efficiently and effectively. Maybe you want to think about payments going through, smaller transactions going through. They don't take much of a block, but they can be incredibly important to people who are sending their ADA around. So that's one thing that we might consider.
And Kevin, tiered pricing is one of the things you're looking at as well.
The way a tiered fee structure would work is that you might pay a little more in the fee structure in order to get a faster processing of your transaction. So your transaction might be something that needs to be processed critically. It's worth paying more for that. And then the system could react to that and give it higher priority in the ordering which transactions are put onto the network. So we'll keep the community informed about what we're doing here. Of course, we do try to do this. We'll engage with the community through the various active forums that we have. And please do send us any suggestions. And please, very importantly, make concrete proposals through the SIP process. These get looked at by a team of experts. They get evaluation, and the ideas coming from those SIPs do get put into practice. So don't think it's a hollow mechanism. We listen to these, and we do take them into account in the development work that we're doing.
So thank you, Kevin and John, for those insights. Nigel, let's wrap things up with you. What's the focus for the next couple of weeks?
Well, top of the agenda is completing our PAB and getting our first round trip on our DApp onto the testnet. So that's our critical thing. We'll see our first sort of NFT marketplace out there that is actually using the PAB and integrated into our Cardano wallet and other components, and also an integration into our Light wallet. So we're aiming for that towards the end of November, early December. And on top of that, we've got lots of other critical things coming down the pipeline. So working with partners to launch in all of their things that they've got coming through, whether it's a DEX, it's an Oracle, it's another NFT marketplace, or any other kind of useful and interesting functionality.
So thank you for that, Kevin, and also to Nigel and John there. That's it for now, but remember to join us the last Thursday of the month for Cardano 360, where we do a deeper dive into the expanding Cardano universe, and we'll get to meet a few of those projects that are building on Cardano. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon.